So these specific attacks where AI is able to take your personal information and personalize an attack, that's called social engineering, right? So just like ChatGPT parses the internet to collect helpful information, we can have malicious AI agents that collect personal data from social media, the internet, and professional information from LinkedIn and your company website as well.
Welcome to Actualizing Success. In this podcast series, our in-house advisors discuss today's finance and technology topics with an emphasis on solutions that embrace tomorrow.
Welcome to the Actualizing Success podcast. Today, we're going to discuss increasing or strengthening Treasury against fraud risks. So today I have with me Baptiste from TrustPair. Baptiste, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, Adam. Thanks for having me. My name is Baptiste Collot, co-founder, CEO of TrustPair. I'm a former treasurer, so I spent half a decade working for big treasury department, and I turned entrepreneur after just experiencing too many fraud and with a conviction that fraud would not be prevented with additional manual processes, but by bringing technology into finance and treasury team. So very happy to be here today. TrustPair is 8 years old, 120 employees, and we support more than 400 large companies globally to support them in their ability to validate bank account ownership for vendors and just making sure that payments goes to the right bank account.
Awesome. Thanks, Baptiste. And, from my side, I'm Dom. I'm a Treasury and Capital Markets consultant with Actualize. While here, my primary focus has been on custom builds, whether it be custom reporting or bespoke technical processes, trying to leverage APIs, middleware, some scripts, as well as some internal AI agents at Actualize. So pretty on topic for today. And looking for data management best practices to advise clients on how to prepare for any AI use cases. And Baptiste, did you want to introduce our topic for the day?
Yeah, sure. So today's topic is really about how treasury teams can prevent fraud, especially in a new context where AI is clearly changing the rules of the game. We have seen over the last decade that fraud was on a rising pace, and so the threats was bigger and bigger, but still things were pretty manual. We have seen a change where cybersecurity and cyber risk was involved. But what changed completely the landscape is the involvement of AI and the use of AI by fraudsters. This started really 2 years ago after the big change in of the century, which is the launch of Gen AI, and clearly that have been a game changer. Frauds are really more complex than they used to be, and that's the big threat for companies, and they clearly need to take actions against that. That's the topic of the day.
Indeed. Thanks, Baptiste. And just to preview some of the agenda for today, we're going to talk about how AI is being used by fraudsters, why AI alone won't protect your business, and the layered defense strategy that we can implement, as well as use cases and best practices. So first, just to talk about how fraudsters can leverage AI to attack treasury teams. Fraud, before, right, the obvious use case we always think of is, a fraudster is going to send you an email asking you for a username and password. There's going to be a bunch of mistypes in there, right? The email is going to have a weird suffix at the end or something like that. But right, with AI, right, so the beauty of AI is that we can leverage it in our day-to-day tasks, right, to help us automate, to help us summarize. In today's environment, we can use it more as an AI assistant to help us in our day-to-day tasks. But with that, right, fraud has now improved, right? Fraudsters have been able to improve their methods, right, to attack treasury teams, right? So one big example of this is what's called a deepfake, right? So for example, I know we're on a podcast right now, but if you were able to see video, right, one example is, with AI, you can take somebody's photo and turn it into a video, take a sample voice recording, turn that into a video as well, to really show somebody's face, and show them talking, and it looks and sounds just like them, but it isn't them, right? So that's deep faking. There's also AI generated phishing emails that mimic your writing style. So for example, right, when I send an email, when Baptiste sends an email, we're going to have a distinct writing style or tone, right, that we portray when we send an email or a Slack message or anything like that. So with those writing styles, fraudsters can leverage AI to take those writing styles and replicate it, right? So these types of methods, right, with AI, these fraudulent methods have now improved, right? So then the question's asked, to personalize these fraud attacks, right? How can AI do that, right? So these specific attacks where AI is able to take your personal information and personalize an attack, that's called social engineering. Right. So just like ChatGPT parses the internet to collect helpful information, we can have malicious AI agents that collect personal data from social media, the internet, and professional information from LinkedIn and your company website as well to personalize attacks based off of your information. Right. So although we have AI agents that are used for good, right, just like those AI agents take information from the internet and things like that to help us, these fraudsters can take your personal information from company websites and LinkedIn to personalize these attacks, to make them feel more real. And one example of this, right, is, I don't know if anybody remembers, way back in the end of 2023, there was an attack in Vegas, right, where a hacker group actually used a social engineering tactic, right? So they went on LinkedIn, got employees' information from LinkedIn, and contacted MGM Casino and Resorts IT help desk to gain administrator access by impersonating different employees, right? With those attacks, since they gained access, it was big on the news, right? They pretty much shut down Vegas. You know, these disruptions, they lasted for about 10 days, causing significant inconvenience to customers and leading to an $100 million loss in that quarter of 2023 and a $40 million settlement as well to resolve lawsuits. Right, so we just talked about how AI is used to enhance fraudulent attempts, but now the question is why AI alone won't prevent fraud. Baptiste, do you want to take some of that?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for this example. I think it is very insightful. And what we used to see and the discussion we have with clients, a lot of people believe that as you can have AI as a weapon, you can have AI as well for the defense. It's true, but in the way you think, you have to it's not an equal battle. And typically, if you think about how you should prevent fraud and what is the consequence of fraud when it comes to vendor payment fraud or third-party payment fraud, at the end, it's a data issue. The payment goes to a wrong bank account. And the question is, who was in charge of validating this bank account? Or which process was in place to make sure that the data, which was hosted in the few systems, like in the ERP, in the Treasury system, maybe in a vendor onboarding platform way earlier in the process, like who was in charge of validating this data and what screwed up? Like what happened that led the company to just pay a fraudulent bank account? And when you consider this, you can easily understand that AI can be used to impersonate a vendor or to find a way to hack the vendor data, the vendor email to send the information. But here the question is completely different. Can AI validate information? No. AI can be used to identify some signals. AI only rely on data, meaning they will rely on like a lot of data sets, a lot of past informations that will allow you to say, hey, maybe this payment is not usual. Maybe this information is not correct. But you need a lot of information. And when it comes to vendor payment fraud, the only thing you need is to make sure that typically you pay the right bank account. So it's a matter of validation, and it's not a matter of technology. This is where considering that technology alone is enough is not, or in this case, AI will not be the silver bullet to prevent fraud. It's part of the answer. But when we discuss with our clients, we clearly see that you need to consider three main components within the company to to identify both the threats and so the solution. The first one is the data itself. So where is this data coming from? The second one, and how is it validated? The second one is clearly about where is this data hosted? What are the systems used over the entire procure-to-pay process, from the vendor onboarding to the data storage in the ERP to the Treasury system, and then the team manipulating this data, manipulating the tools, and maybe doing some validations. And so if you don't consider these three things, like the data, the people, and the tools, well, you will miss something. And considering this, you clearly understand that technology is not the single answer. AI is not the single answer, for a couple of reasons that you will discuss them, but basically mainly because finance teams, office of the CFOs in general, are very siloed. So the data that is hosted in vendor onboarding tools, in procurement tools, in the ERP, in treasury teams, in treasury systems, well, are just not accessible by a single tool. And that's the main issue, and that leads to the big threats today.
Exactly, right? So the process that we can take to build that type of defense, right? We have our vendor validation and monitoring. We have the human oversight and approval layers, right? So that's primarily avoiding blind trust and automation, right? We can't just trust an AI agent. We can't just trust some code that we wrote to go through our approval process. That human click is very key, right? Especially in terms of ownership. If the AI makes a bad decision, who's going to own that, right? So there still has to be some human oversight involved in the process, right? In a common use case, there are a lot of TMSs. They have a multi-approval setup. So, right, although an AI can be integrated in that process to help flag anomalies, right, you can't have a fully automated process. And then the other thing, the big issue with the data silos. These days, so many organizations, especially big organizations, they have so many systems, which leads to so many data silos, right? And the key there is to build a clean and centralized data lake across your organization, because that ensures that whatever data that you have in your TMS, whatever data that you have in your ERP, whatever data that you have in your accounting system, all that data can be put in a single place, right? And when it's put in a single place, essentially you're going through what's called an extract, transform, load process, right? You're extracting data from your systems, you're loading it into a data lake, and you're transforming that data and kind of combining all of the data from across your systems into one place. And when you go through that process, you're essentially validating that all of your data has to be correct. And I think, Baptiste, right, you said a stat that a certain percentage of bank account data was outdated after a certain point in time.
Absolutely. And this is the main issue we see for our clients, the ability to monitor data quality over time. And especially at the treasury level, when you discuss with treasury team, you clearly see that a lot of payment rejections are related to vendor, to data quality, outdated data because the bank account was closed, or just the format of the data was not correct. So again, this data issue is everywhere in any discussion that we have with any treasury and finance teams in general, and for a very good reason, which is data has a very short lifetime, especially when it comes to vendor data, where typically company are created, they are closed, they go bankrupt, many things can happen in a life, and especially when you're on board a vendor, usually you have weeks or months before paying this vendor. Sometimes you have months between two payments. So a lot of things can happen. And how can you just be sure that the data you still have in your system is accurate, is up to date? That's the real issue. And that's part of the answer. Making sure that you can trust the data that you have, and making sure that you have the right tool to continuously monitor the accuracy of this data and be alerted in case of data decay. Be alerted in case of any risk associated with an error or fraud associated with your vendor data. And that's the first layer. Automation and automated validation is absolutely key to stop being blind about the data quality. And then the second layer is really how human can take over, like the case management. When a risk is identified, what is the process? Do you have the right tool to take the decision? Do you have the right insights provided by tools to give you some context about, hey, should I pay or not? Should I block this payment or should I proceed to this and take a decision that will not block the entire payments, which is, we all know that when it comes to Treasury, payments cut off, etc., are super important. Well, typically you need to be able to react fast and take a decision with confidence thanks to this, meaning that you need to reduce issues you have to review. While today we clearly see that Treasury teams usually have just a lot of payments, a lot of data to manage, but they are not equipped to manage the volume.
Exactly, right. And I think that's right. That's a perfect point to get into how can organizations prepare for the AI revolution, right? And I think the key here is to implement a data strategy, because in the end of the day, these AI models that are leveraged, these are going to continuously improve. When you're implementing any sort of AI flagging fraud engine, there are other teams around the world who are building these AI models. And the one thing that you have control over is your proprietary data. So it's your responsibility to implement a data strategy and make sure that all of the data across your systems are consolidated in one spot so that, right, even though today, right, if I pass all my data to a model and it's not giving me the results I want, maybe in 6 months, a year, 2 years, those models are going to improve very quick, right? And we see it in the news all the time. A new breakthrough was found in AI. So in the end of the day, right, these models are going to be updated and changed, but our data is going to be the same, right? So we need a data strategy to ensure all of our data is consolidated and can be passed into those models so that when these models are good enough for us to deploy it in our production, in our approval process that's live, right, we have to make sure our data is in a good format to do that. Another step that you can take, right, in addition to incorporating AI into your approval workflow is employee training and awareness. That's still very critical in the end of the day in terms of preventing fraud, right, is that you have to make sure that your people are trained on identifying fraud cases, right? And, just like we talked about with the data silo, even if AI can't be incorporated into our workflow today, your people should be trained as to, if they're seeing something on a payment that doesn't look right and they're kind of going through their approval workflow, what are the sources of data that they can go to, right? Because if I'm in my TMS, for example, and my approval workflow lives in my TMS, we're talking about consolidating data from your accounting system, from your ERP. If I haven't incorporated AI into my workflow today, so that data is missing, and we still have a manual process in place, where do people look when something doesn't look right? Because I feel like a lot of clients, what they're doing right now is they're just looking in their TMS. So even if AI isn't there yet, it's not ready to be incorporated into our approval workflow, people should know what other sources, what other systems are available to them to validate payment data themselves today, right? So while we're talking about these data cells and incorporating it into an AI agent, we should still be aware of those silos today to call out if I see something that doesn't look right, how do I go ahead and validate that information? And, another important step just in terms of preparing for this AI revolution. First of all, we have our data consolidation. That's really our big focus. But the other thing is establishing an internal AI usage guideline. For example, right, as we're talking about these models improving, one thing that we shouldn't do, for example, is we shouldn't take an export of data from our TMS and ERP and pass it into a public LLM, right, like ChatGPT or something, and ask it to tell me if a payment looks right. That should be something that, is either blocked by the organization or it's in internal AI usage guideline, right? Like we have to make sure that none of our proprietary data is going to be used for training by any sort of other organization, right? Because in the end of the day, your proprietary data is your most valuable tool, and you have to make sure that's protected. So when you're consolidating your data and getting ready to incorporate it into an AI agent, right, you should either use a trusted vendor or a custom agent that you can build yourself. There's certain platforms like GCP, AWS. There are a lot of offerings there, but that requires some development skill. So, in the end of the day, the one role that you have no matter what is to prepare your data for this. And whether you use a trusted vendor or build a custom agent yourself, you have to make sure that that proprietary data is controlled. Baptiste, anything else to add before we jump into our wrap up and call to action?
No, sure. And I think to bring a very concrete example about how finance team in general can take action, and especially for Treasury team, think holistically about how do you get this data? The data Treasury inherits from other teams is the entire procure to pay process. So think about what is the data you would need at the treasury level to run this kind of analysis. What is the level of information that you would need to feed your tools to get the most precise answer from any AI-driven solution. And so if you think about this, you have three key steps. You have the acquisition of the data, typically like vendor data, how you onboard vendors, what are the information that you collect, are you sure you get them at the right format, are you sure that all this is well validated, automated, and so this is really the data acquisition part. Then the second point is about how you will host this data in an ERP, then in data lakes, etc. Making sure that this data is constantly up to date, making sure that you will be aware if there is a decay, if this data is not accurate anymore, and then do the same at the treasury level. This is typically what TrustPair does with its clients, just ensuring that everywhere in the process the data is correct, ensuring that you can validate data at the vendor onboarding level, ensuring that you continuously monitor the accuracy of the data in the ERP, and of course, at the end, at the treasury level, being able to make the link between all the checks that have been done before, so have an holistic view of all this data, to have the right level of information to be provided to the treasury team while they will validate the payments and making sure they can take the right decision. That's a very concrete example about how you leverage both AI and automation and how you apply this, but treasury team alone cannot act and get the right answer. You have to work over the entire P2P process, over the entire office of the CFO to get concrete results and impactful results.
Great. Thanks, Baptiste. And to close this out, I wanted to remind listeners that AI will continue to evolve, right? And those are some of the strategies that we discussed today. And so will fraud, right? And the question isn't if you'll be targeted, it's when. And I just wanted to remind everybody to reach out to Actualize and TrustPair for any inquiries regarding how to further prevent fraud and or how to prevent for the AI revolution. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Actualizing Success. Make sure to visit us online at www.actualizeconsulting.com, where you can explore our service offerings. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or your preferred platform. If you've enjoyed what we talked about today, please consider leaving a review and following us on LinkedIn. If you have any questions or would like to share your opinions with us, please send us a note at podcast@actualizeconsulting.com. We look forward to hearing from you.